Hello there, my lovelies. Welcome to another episode of Listening to the Voices in Our Heads with me, Jenna O'Malley, your soul writer, author of the Arsinoe Forest Alliance, Books 1 and 2, with Book 3, Bound by Vengeance of Mind, arriving in about 60 days or less for June 1st, 2022. We are joined today by a fellow authortuber on hiatus, author of all things mythical and paranormal, and just in general, a fellow lady nerd, Genevieve Scholl. We have a long discussion about all the ins and outs of things in our nerddoms that do influence us, things we do like with writing, things we do like with reading, and of course, we talk about her podcast, Let's Get Mystical. If you have any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat box as we go along. And as always, my lovelies, take care of yourself a little bit better each and every day. We know you're worth it. Of course, now let's rock it. Hello there, my lovelies. Welcome to another episode of Listening to the Voices in Our Heads with me, Jenna O'Malley, your soul writer, and I have a new friend here with us today. Hello, my dear. Tell us all about yourself, who you are, what you do, and we're going to buckle up for a very interesting hour, I think.
I hope it's going to be interesting anyway. Well, okay, so I'm Genevieve Scholl, a self-published author, have been for, I don't even know how many years, over 10. That's all. I just keep saying over 10 because I don't know how many years it's been now. I've lost track. All of my, what I call my backlog, which is my previously published stories, were either contemporary romance or paranormal. But I'm currently kind of transitioning into young adult. So yeah, big jump,
That's
big change. Yeah. And I'll explain why. But I'm also finishing, I just had a book come out in January, which is the first in my Shadow Coalition series, which is a paranormal hunter series. So I am going to finish that, and that is adult. But once that's over, it'll be purely young adult. Let's see. I'm also a podcast hostess and producer, a authortuber, although that's kind of taking a break right now because the podcast is taking up so much time. I work as an editor, a formatter, a personal assistant to authors, and now I'm getting into cover design as well. Let's see. So much to say. When it comes to reading rather than writing, definitely reading young adult, not just because I'm writing it, but I have been focusing more on young adult because of that fact.
And actually, the way we met was over podcasting, because I was on your podcast earlier this month or end of February.
Episode 3. So you were
wow.
in the beginning.
Yeah, it's been a while. And you're right. Yeah, podcasting takes up a lot of time. So, has writing always been your life? If not, then what else?
Surprisingly, actually, no. I mean, I've always written stories. I mean, my mom still has stories from when I was like 6 of me writing love stories between animals that really shouldn't be together. But actually, I've wanted to be things ranging from a cop to a photographer, and I got my paralegal degree. So I've done a lot of things. But for the most part, it's writing. Writing is definitely where I think I belong.
I studied as a paralegal studies. I didn't quite finish. I needed 2 classes and just wanted to be done. So I just got my administrative assistant and regret it now. But at the same time, do you think any of those studies influenced the way your writing voice comes out?
I don't know if it influenced my voice, but it definitely has provided research that I can use in my stories.
That's true.
I haven't really done too much with the law stuff in my stories, but it definitely has shown up. But the photography and stuff, yeah, that's definitely influenced some of my story, some of my plots for sure. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So then, with that being the case, what is your biggest fear and your biggest excitement as an author?
Not being good enough. I've always struggled with that. No matter how many books I write, I always struggle that it's not good enough and it shouldn't be published, but I do it anyway. um, the usual stuff, people hating it when it's released, bad reviews, although I tend not to look at those anymore. But I think my biggest fear, I had a 3-year stretch where I could not write. No matter how hard I tried, I could not write anything. So I think probably my biggest fear is never being able to finish a book. And just coming to that point in my life where it's just ended. And
Agreed.
As many times as I have said that I was going to stop because it was such a struggle, I haven't. And I think if I ever get to the point where I do, it's just going to be like, no, part of me is just gone,
You're preaching to the choir. Oh my goodness. This is definitely something that my husband and I talk about a lot. And just feeling that I know I did it once again. Can I keep doing it?
Right.
Repeat performances are not easy, guys.
And I have a tendency, even if my stories start out as standalones, I have a tendency to make them into series. And then it's like, well, now I'm committed to finish the series. And that just adds more pressure.
So do you find it like since you're self-publishing, is it too much pressure on yourself you think you're adding, or?
Yeah. I mean, people tend to, if I don't finish a series, they come back and say, well, what happened? It's not like they, force me into it or anything. They understand if I don't finish the series, but it's a disappointment for me in that I don't finish the series, but also that I don't finish it for the readers, because I know if I read a book and then nothing happens after that, especially if there's any kind of cliffhanger, I'm very disappointed.
Right.
So, I mean, I don't tend to write cliffhangers, but there is stuff in the story that could be continued. So,
and not all of it has to be, and the world is assumed to go on.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So you also run your own podcast, and it's over on Spotify. You said you were taking a break from authortube specifically for a little bit to focus on it. What is it called, and what is the concept behind it? How has growth been, and where do you see yourself going in the future?
So it's called Let's Get Mystical, which is a little play on words. And it's completely supernatural based. We tend to get off on some tangents, but the whole purpose of the podcast is supernatural stories and shows and all supernatural guests. As for growth, right now we're only on Spotify. So, we're kind of small at the moment. We are going to be, and this is a first time announcement, I haven't told anybody, but we are going to be going wide with the podcast after season 1 is over. So on the off season, we'll be putting it on the other platforms, and then starting with season 2, we'll be doing all platforms. So I'm hoping growth will be better after that. But we've, talked to authors of supernatural books, demonologists. We just had a medium on, so it's a lot of fun.
Oh my goodness, you have quite the wide variety of audience members probably checking in with you too. So I'm hoping that they follow you to those other platforms. Would you consider backlogging it here to authortube and YouTube?
I had a thought actually just yesterday that I might put the episodes up on YouTube from season 1 during the off season. I mean, it would be audio only, but I might still do it, or at the very least I might put some highlight reels up. I haven't decided yet.
I will admit, a lot of people who listen to this do tend to tell me I'm normally listening in while I'm doing other things, so there is an audience for it.
Well, and I also, at the moment, we don't really have any kind of like comment section or anything. So true. I'm thinking maybe putting them up on YouTube will help with that. I mean, we do have a Patreon, but at the moment we have no patrons. So I'd like to get to a point where we could at least have somewhere where people can ask questions of the guests and things. So
that'd be wonderful. That kind of interaction.
Probably will be thinking and brainstorming a lot during the off season, which our season ends in May, so we're getting close.
Wow, that is really close.
Yeah.
Like a matter of a couple weeks close for sure. And even just borrowing a question from your episode that we shared way back when at this point, have you experienced any paranormal events in your life? Told the story about the house I grew up in. What about
Yes.
you?
Um, I have. There's a lot of them that I could talk about, but the thing that's usually the most interesting for people is the fact that I have what I like to call premonition dreams. So I have dreams that sometimes they come true, but then I also sometimes have ones where it's something will happen to somebody in the dream and I will wake up and have residual effects from that. So one of the stories I told on my podcast was that I had a dream about somebody that got shot by a hunter in the woods, and when I woke up, the spot where they got shot hurt on me for at least an hour like after that. So yeah, I kind of decided to label myself as a psychic empath because I have these premonitions and things, but I also feel things from them. Can't
Hmm.
always do anything about them because sometimes I don't even know who they're about. But that's kind of the story that I like to tell. I mean, I've had my brother's house is haunted, you know, and
Right.
I house sat when they went on their honeymoon and things were happening while I was there. And so yeah, I've had things like that and I have seen a few spirits. But definitely the premonitions is the thing that sticks with me quite a bit.
Do you experience, like, we'll call them symptoms for lack of a better term, but do you, like, when you wake up, do you always, like, you feel really cold, clammy, break out in a cold sweat kind of deal? Do you feel super overheated? Is there
Um,
always, like, that part of you hurt that someone else got hurt? Or was
Not
that new?
always. I don't know why, but some of the dreams there's more of a connection than others. So it doesn't always happen that way. Uh, I've had some that I wish, you know, I was able to know what to do about them because there are some I won't mention specifics, but there have been some in the past that were about major events that were on the news the next day. So I kind of
Oh,
wish, you know, I would have known that that was the case. So it tends to be a little difficult for me to know if it's just a dream or a premonition sometimes.
right.
So there, I mean, sometimes I can do something about it, sometimes I can't, and that's what you got to deal with when you have that kind of thing.
Very true. When you talk about that and mention it that way, it reminds me of my mom growing up. She's one of those people that if you are like 2 days pregnant, she can sense it,
Wow.
or she had a dream about it. But at the same time, there's a bad side to that coin. Every time someone in the family has passed away, about 2 to 3 weeks beforehand, she has a horrible dream about them. Yeah.
I
So it's like
mean,
you mentioned that, and I'm like, oh my God, my mother
I
has something similar. That must be
yeah,
horrible.
I've had dreams where people have died. It hasn't always come true, but it definitely knowing that some of my dreams can be premonitions, it definitely causes some panic. I
Right.
had one a few years ago about a cop friend of mine that he died on the job. So I was like, you know, trying to contact him, but obviously he's working. So, and it was freaking me out. I didn't go back to sleep after that one. Let's just say that.
And that's what's going to be my next question. Are there some where you've had, if not full blown insomnia, just bouts of then?
Oh, definitely, definitely. The major things is usually what keeps me awake because, as I said, I wish I had known that they were actually something and I do something about them. But oftentimes, knowing that I can't do anything about them is what keeps me awake because it makes me feel like, you know, I know this thing is going to happen, but I can't do anything about it. Then that makes me
Right.
feel useless, basically.
And it's understandable, therefore, why you write.
Yes, definitely, definitely.
Definitely.
The one where the person got shot by the hunter, that one I definitely did not go back to sleep after that. And that one ended up coming true. So
I was afraid to ask that. I'm sorry to
Yeah.
hear that. Oh my
It wasn't anybody
goodness.
I knew, but when I heard about it on the news, it's just like, ugh, I wish it wasn't true. I wish it had just been a dream.
Agreed, agreed. So, when it comes to paranormal as a genre, you've dropped this a little bit before, but do you see it crossing into other realms in your own writing? Like, do you include paranormal romance as one, but do you also include like mystery, crime? Why or why not?
Yes, one of my books actually, The Shift, was a paranormal um like bodyguard type story. So it was a group, it was a
Ooh,
team of people that were basically entrusted to protect the paranormal world. So, and that was one of the ones that was supposed to continue and has not yet, but I'm not giving up on that one just yet.
sometimes you need a break from them, and that is
Yeah.
totally fair. Do you think you'll write more stories like that one in the future?
Definitely. I'm never gonna give up the paranormal. It's one of my great loves, which is why the podcast is about paranormal supernatural stuff. I just think that maybe I'm gonna be changing to young adult paranormal. Because I am enjoying young adult much more than I ever enjoyed writing adult stories. So it's really weird. I can't explain.
Really?
Yeah, I have no idea why, but it's much more enjoyable to me to write young adult.
So why the change then? Let me go ahead and just ask, why changing from adult to
Well, more information can be found on my authortube, but I did a experiment where I wrote in as many genres as I could. Everything but sci-fi, because I will never touch sci-fi, but it's another story. Um, and even some of the stories that I had planned to be adult came out young adult, and I enjoyed it much more and got much more words in the young adult than in the adults.
interesting?
So, and the whole purpose of the writing experiment was to figure out where I would be happiest. So I've decided that I just need to go with it with the young adult. So,
Sometimes what you love to read isn't always exactly what you like to write in
yes.
this
And I
case.
mean, I love to read everything. I pretty much will read any genre, again, except sci-fi. Um but I've definitely gravitated more towards young adult lately.
Understood. So, what book recs do you have for paranormal reads of any subgenre? Any other authors of paranormal you enjoy?
Well, I'm gonna do a little shameless plugging here for my podcast co-host. She has a large series of paranormal stories. They're all paranormal romance, although they're not like erotica. They're more of like mystery in that they are fighting um rogue paranormal shifters
Hmm.
who are trafficking other people. So they're not really like erotica. I mean, they have moments in them, but they're definitely romance. I
That's
enjoy
not
those.
the focus. Is
Yeah, definitely.
gotcha.
I enjoy those a lot. I may be a little biased since I am her editor, but I enjoy those a lot. There's a lot of them. I'm currently reading Skin of the Sea by Natasha Bowen. That's a young adult mermaid story. Um, there's so many out there. I couldn't even begin to tell you how many I've read.
And it just seems like this genre really has, as a whole, blown up, not just in the last 2 years, but I want to say in the last decade.
Yes, definitely. One of the others that I read back in December, possibly November, but around Christmas time, it's called The Yuletide King by Claire Marta. So
Yes.
good. So good. She took all of, well, as many of the Santa lore as she could get, and she put it all together in one cohesive story. I don't know how she ever did it, but it's fantastic.
It must have taken months of planning because there's you almost anybody from any, I'm definitely going to say European culture, but almost any culture that Christmas has touched, they're probably going to find a connecting
Oh
piece
yeah.
back to it.
Yeah. As I was reading it, I was finding all sorts of different lore from several countries. I mean, there was stuff from the United States, stuff from England, stuff from Ireland. There was just everything was in this story. And it wasn't just Santa either. I mean, there was Jack Frost, and
Oh
it was
yeah.
just so much stuck into one story. I don't know how she ever did it.
part of me wondered, and this is one of those things of, if I could ask any author a question, I would love to ask her if she watched the old Rankin Bass claymation stop motion videos of all those guys to a
I wouldn't
degree.
be surprised, honestly. I did talk to her a little bit after I read it, and because she's one of my Facebook friends, and she said that the amount of research she had to do was so extensive that she was exhausted. She said, but it was completely worth it.
It probably was why the book did, in my opinion, so well.
Oh yeah, well, and you know me and that word research. It's one of my favorite words.
I teach it for a living. I love it so much, is what I've told another author recently. So, for your own books, are there specific paranormal type things you like to write? Like, are there certain character tropes, stereotypes, settings, things you like?
I pretty much everything. And my Shadow Coalition series that I mentioned, that the first one came out in January, is going to touch on a lot of different supernatural stuff because it's kind of inspired by the show Supernatural. So we're going to go as extensive as we can with the supernatural creatures. There's not really anything that I wouldn't write. There are some creatures that I would definitely have to do much more research on than others. But I think if I had to pick a favorite, it probably would be werewolves.
Woohoo! So, wait a minute. Are you a Twilight fan or no?
Of the movies, not the books. I know,
You're one
unpopular
of the few
opinion.
people I've heard say that. I don't think it's necessarily a bad unpopular opinion, because the person who directed the movies did what they were asked to do. I'll word it that way.
I mean,
they understood the assignment.
I will say the movies still could have some improvement, but I enjoyed them more than I did the books.
As far as that goes, were you definitely team Jacob, was it, for them?
If we have to pick between Jacob and Edward, then yeah, Jacob. But if I'm getting to pick anybody, then just team werewolf in general.
Fair enough. I'm not the biggest Twilight fan, so I'm not going to spill tea today. So, are there certain tropes, species types, themes, and more as far as, like, even reading goes? Like, is there definitely, the second you see X thing, you're like, I suddenly have zero interest, even though it's paranormal?
The usual stuff, like slavery, rape, anything, any kind of animal cruelty, or I'm gone. I mean, I've walked out of movies because of animal cruelty.
That's a good point. And in paranormal, that would be a huge contending factor that other genres might not necessarily deal with as often.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a threshold. I mean, if, shifters are fighting or something and an animal gets in the way, or shifters have to, live on animals sometimes, I get it. But like, for an example, I walked out of the new Suicide Squad movie because of animal cruelty scenes. I walked out.
See, a couple of my, like, we're talking high schoolers, so 17-year-olds and up is the age group specifically I'm talking about, with my juniors who I had this conversation with. They even said that it was a good movie until that happened.
Yep. It was, I wouldn't say it was a good movie. It wasn't horrible. There were other factors that made me not like it, but as soon as the animal cruelty started happening, I was gone. I mean, I even considered asking for a refund, but that wouldn't have been fair to the theater, so.
Yeah, see, a couple of my students did ask for refunds, and I said, so what you should do in the next time is not mess over the theater that's striving and struggling to make money. You should write to, because they actually do have, a lot of people don't know this, there are places you can write to complain about stuff like that. And it doesn't necessarily change that movie, but some of that stuff I think is being taken into closer consideration by the media, or if not, they should listen to the people who want to. Because
I mean, if the animal cruelty is important to the story or something, okay, but I would say do it in a way where it doesn't necessarily have to be seen or graphic. I mean, the stuff in Suicide Squad was just, it was unnecessary, the amount of graphic stuff we saw.
It went beyond the statement of, this is Suicide Squad, deal with it.
Yeah.
Okay, you took Suicide Squad's level of chaos too far, guys.
Yeah.
Is essentially the feedback we're getting here.
Definitely. I will tend to shy away from love triangles as well. I will read them, but it's not something that I search for. Like, I would have to see something in the plot otherwise that would interest me. Because it's just, I don't know. There's nothing wrong with them. I just don't enjoy, the back and forth very much. There is one, it's not paranormal, but there is one book series that is pretty much through the whole series is a love triangle, and yet I keep reading story after story after story, and that is Joanne Fluke's Cookie Books.
Oh, yes!
Their Hannah Swenson series. No matter how much hemming and hawing she does over who she's going to pick, I will still read that series. And there's like, I don't even know, 30 books in there? I don't even know anymore.
And it's, the way it was written, I thought at first it was a book series that knew it was making fun of itself. Oh yeah, it knows it's making fun of itself so good that you forget it's making fun of itself to a small degree, because it does take some of those very love triangle type tropes and spin them in a way that's like, that's funny, but at the same time, it couldn't have gone any other way.
Yeah, I can see where you get that from. And then when it comes to my writing, as much as I love stories about aliens, I don't think I could ever write one. I just think it's just too involved for me to write.
I was going to say, you were saying sci-fi's off my charts.
Well,
why?
The problem with sci-fi that I tend to have is, and no offense, but I even sort of had this problem with your book, but it's a personal thing. I get lost sometimes. I have to go back and reread things several times to realize where I am. I mean, yours wasn't as intense, but I've read, like, in high school, we had to read Piers Anthony all the time. And there was a lot of his books that I just like, what? I have no idea what I just read. And here's another unpopular book opinion from me. I prefer Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter movies over the books because of that problem.
I can't agree with Lord of the Rings because they got rid of Tom Bombadil. I'm sorry. He's my favorite character.
Hey, to each their own, you know?
Yep.
I can't follow the books as well as I can follow the movies.
Right. And that's definitely something I contended with as an author writing my books of, I know this is a choice. And I think maybe that's why my next series isn't going to be as epic level everything. So
it definitely was much less of an issue with yours. I think yours was just mostly I had to remember who was who.
And that was part, and I did that on purpose because the point was to make you feel like Christian. He's literally landed in the middle of what the heck just happened. So that was goals. Because my hope was, as he came to know people, you all would too.
Yeah, well, they definitely felt that.
Well, thank you. So, back on track though. As far as your books go, we have a really fun question here I've been asking on occasion for your own books, especially since it sounds like you're quite prolific in your writing and have quite the variable cast of characters. Do you have one character that qualifies for a Book Spouse of the Year award? And if so, who? Why? If not, why not?
It's kind of hard because I very rarely have a spouse in my books. But in The Shift, the main character has 2 dads. So I definitely think they probably would win that award just because they're just a couple. Like there's nothing stereotypical about them. They're not classified as gay, or they're just husband and husband. And to them, family is the biggest thing. The way that they treat each other and the way they treat their daughter. And she, in The Shift, she's a test tube baby. So she was and I know this is, as of right now, physically impossible, but this is part of why I wrote it. She was born with both of their DNA and then that's why she's a test tube baby, because that's how they did it.
Essentially, they extracted the female sides from
Well,
female chromosomes from both
I
of
didn't
them.
go as extensive into the science in the book, but yeah, it was basically she is their daughter, both their daughter. And then because she was a test tube baby, the scientists snuck in shifter genes, and that's how she becomes a shifter. But that was the whole premise of why I wrote that book.
Dang, if only having IVF done to me would have that happen. Dang. Man, husband would love that. Yeah, because we would totally come home with a vampire baby and he'd hate me. Wow, love it. So, would you say that, like, your readers would want to be married to either of them, or just would idolize their relationship, you think?
Well, without giving any spoilers, I'm just going to say
please,
yes.
No spoilers.
I'm just going to say yes. I will say something happens in the book that a lot of readers were very angry about, so I'd say that they had a connection with the fathers, that's for sure.
Did you make them throw the book and consider throwing their mobile device, having the ebook on it? How dare you?
I will say my at the time she was my beta reader, but also she typed up the story because I was having hand problems. And she swore at me and called me names when she got to that part. So
I'm expecting to get one of them phone calls from my editor here on April 1st when I send her my book 3. Good Lord.
I gotta say, if that happens with a beta reader or an editor or anybody that reads your book pre-publication, you're good. You're golden.
Very much agreed. I also found that people who tend to have any emotional outbursts, like one of my writing friends has read a certain scene in my book 3, and it's a wedding scene, and she's like, I'm sobbing my eyes out because it's so pretty. I'm like, and you're not one of those people who cries at weddings. Noted.
Yeah, definitely. I always, when I edit for people, if there's any point that makes me cry, I just send them an email and say, you just made me cry. I think you're good.
Be honest. Seriously, my lovelies listening in, if you review anybody's books, sometimes a single sentence of, this cracked me up, means the world. I get that sometimes with the feedback from my books, with the sibling banter going on. So let us know what we're doing right and what you hate. We like hearing what you hate. We like knowing what we did right too. So, introduce us to the one character in your books who is most likely to steal the spotlight without you realizing how much readers could love them.
So, this took some thought, but I think any book that I have a child as a character in is the one that always steals the spotlight. Way back at the beginning of my self-publishing career, I wrote a Christmas series, and in the 3rd book, there's a little girl that is the main character's daughter. No matter how many people read this book, everybody comes back with, I want to read the daughter's story. And I'm like, okay, yeah, well, maybe I'll write it someday, but even at this point, years after I wrote the book, she's still only like a preteen, so it's gonna have to wait until a long time from now.
Oh my goodness. But the fact that they're requesting it, that's awesome. That's definitely some reader support. Do you think other versions of the child showed up in other characters under different names? You know what, if you know what I mean?
I don't know. I don't think so. I honestly, anytime there's a kid, or like in the Christmas series, there was a couple of elves and everybody just always comments on them. So I think it's always the secondary characters that people always focus on in my books. I don't know why. I did have a book called Until Death Do I Part, which was a pure romance book. And that was the male lead. Everybody comments on him too, because, and some people comment bad, but some people are like, oh, I love him, you know, I need to know more. The whole premise of the story is that the main character finds out she has breast cancer, and she decides that, because the doctors say, you have this X amount of time, and she decides that before that happens, she's going to have the wedding of her dreams, regardless if she has a groom or not. So that's why it's called Until Death Do I part, rather than, yeah. But her best friend has pretended for years to be gay because he has such strong feelings for her and didn't want any chance of it coming out. And so through the process of the story, he, is kind of like, to the reader, not necessarily to the character, but showing his love for her and all this other stuff. And so yeah, he's kind of been the recurring one of readers that are talking about him. I mean, most of my other books, it's a like a one and done. They don't talk about the characters afterwards, but he keeps coming up.
That's like, none of it's told from his POV, but they wish you would go back and retell it from his.
There are. It's dual POV, so it's like almost every other chapter ish. So there's scenes in his POV, but it's not until almost towards the end of the book that he finally tells her how he feels. So it's more that he's talking to the reader than to the character.
Gotcha. Understood. So, is there one character you hope your readers loathe as much as you do in your books? Because, for example, there's Bjorn, one of the males for book 2. He's a great guy. He's a really good spouse for Rochelle. He and I do not get along. I hate being in his head. He hates being in mine. Do you have any of that situation going on?
Not really. I mean, yeah, I don't really like writing anything with the villains, but there's nobody that I absolutely despise. There was one book that I pulled from the shelves that he was pretty bad. Talking currently, though, I think the one I'm working on right now, the young adult that I'm working on, there's one of the friends of the male character. He's fast becoming somebody I hate, so he might end up being the one that everybody despises.
Alrighty, so no names going to be mentioned here at all, because we don't want to poison the readers or anything. Yeah, I made the mistake of doing that. Don't do that. I told everybody up front, Abraxas is a jerk. Watch out for him. Everybody hates him.
I did have the second book in my Christmas series was the redemption arc of the villain. She wasn't really a villain, but the bad, the person that people didn't like in the first book. Because I felt like she really needed the redemption arc because she's not really evil. She was the girlfriend of the male from the first book, and it turns out, this is not a spoiler, so I can say this, but the male character is the son of Santa. And so she was dating him, and when she found out who he was, she freaked out and said some things she shouldn't have said and ran. So I felt like she wasn't really a villain, so I gave her story as a redemption arc, and it's been years since I published that. I mean, probably almost 10 years, honestly, because it was back in the beginning of my self-publishing career, and people still don't like that book.
Oh,
because
man.
They don't want her to have that redemption arc. And I'm like, you know what? Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people could say they don't like that book, and I never should have written it, but I'm glad I wrote it because she deserved that story.
And sometimes you learn more as a writer from those stories than the readers care to read, and that's okay too.
Yeah. She deserved her story, whether people like it or not. So
agreed. I like that phrasing. All characters do deserve their story, for sure. Speaking of, the main character from your aforementioned reading rec meets a main character from your books. What's their first encounter like, for better and for worse?
This is an interesting question, and I really don't know how to answer it. I don't know. I mean, I'm reading young adult right now. I don't know if you follow anybody else on authortube, but I'm working on reading all of Sarah Sutton's
Yep.
books. So I've been reading her for like months because I bought them all in paperback and I've just been reading one after the
Wow.
other.
She just writes so much. It's a lot of
Yeah,
reading.
yeah, she's a quick writer and she's a great writer. I love her books. So I was trying to think if any of her characters met any of mine, if anything would happen. And I do have in the past I wrote a short young adult, more like new adult because it's college age, Halloween story about a witch and a non-witch that were switched at birth. And I was thinking if one of her characters met them, because she has a Halloween book. Yeah, I can't remember the name of it now, but I was thinking if her Halloween book and my Halloween book got together, it would be interesting because hers is like metaphorical witches, you know, like just people like dressing up as witches and stuff, whereas mine has real witches in it. So I was
Oh, the
thinking about what would happen
chaos.
there. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. And speaking of, that's a very good author choice. I keep forgetting she does have a couple of holiday themed works, and they're all really cleverly themed and paced to match. So it's not like, oh, this is just another Halloween, or oh, this is just another Christmas novel.
Yeah, yeah. I just recently read her Christmas one that she brought out in 2021. It was great. It was great. It was a little different than her other books, but it still was fantastic.
That's what I keep hearing. It's on my Christmas read this year because I didn't get to it last year. I was
Oh my god,
overburdened.
I blew through it. And I wasn't even planning on reading it because I had other books lined up, but I just couldn't. Every time I saw it, I was like, I just got to go get the ebook. And I usually don't read ebooks because I have migraines and stuff, so I usually only read physical books, but I just like, I said screw it. I'm just going to get it.
It's I will sometimes start off looking at an ebook, and then if I really like it, I will get the paperback eventually, because otherwise we'd be broke.
Yeah, it's not easy having to read physical books all the time, but between writing, working on the computer, and then if I read on a device too, it's just my head is done. I'm just useless the next day. So
Agreed. And
I've
you got to
even started using pen and paper for my books because it's just less screen time, the better.
and you got to take care of your body first, or your body's going to make you take care of it,
Yeah,
unfortunately. Well,
and
fortunately for it.
I do not like migraines, so if I can avoid them, I do it.
I don't blame you. Do you have certain times, like, I know a couple of my students get really bad migraines when the time change happens in the spring and in the fall. Do certain things like that mess you up or make them worse, or
The time change usually doesn't give me migraines, it just makes me sluggish. But definitely stress. Stress is a huge factor. I am, and I don't want to say this in a way that's going to make it sound bad because it's not, but I am very much an introvert.
me too,
And
so no shame.
if I spend too much time with people, I get a migraine. Like even like a family party, I go and I come home and I'm like, okay, I don't want to talk to anybody for days because I'm just done socializing.
My husband knows that these are far less draining than an in-person signing for me, and an in-person signing lasts hours and hours, and I might only talk to a couple of people sometimes. And he said, why is a live stream less draining? Because I can be done. I can put it away and I can detach. With
And I also
in-person signing, it's harder.
I also think the fact that you're in your own home is very grounding. Because when I first started doing the podcast, I was terrified that it was going to just be a flop and I was going to sound like an idiot. And the fact that I was going to have guests was just terrifying to me. But it's not as exhausting as it is leaving the house and talking to people physically.
Agreed. 100%. Very much 100% agreed. And you're talking about you're in the comfort of your own home and everything, and I have a kitty sitting at my feet.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised mine hasn't shown up, but he hasn't been feeling good, so
Well, the one that showed up this time, because last time we talked, they made a ruckus on my end. This one's just sitting here, Miss Drina, looking up at me like, "Are you okay, Mom?" Okay, I'm gonna just keep standing on guard as if nothing's happening.
And I will say that I realize that what's behind me is not the best things in the world, like the litter box and everything, but I live in a very tiny apartment, so this is what you get. This is my life.
I was gonna say, our closet's that way, our bedroom's that way. I'm right in between the two,
This
so
this room
100%
that
understood.
this room that I'm in is my office, my bedroom, the cat's room. It's just it's tiny, so it's everything is everywhere.
You're preaching to the choir, 100%. My husband's like, "Do you leave that room?" Not unless I have to.
I almost considered moving my desktop so that because I have a corner in my bedroom that you can't see that's off screen that is called my nerd corner. So it has like Supernatural and Doctor Who and Marvel and Star Wars and everything over there. So I almost considered moving it to point it towards that, but it would have been too much work.
Oh, we are going to go ahead and wind down for the end of our podcast here, my friends. But what tips do you have to share for aspiring authors looking to work with paranormal as a genre in any way, shape, or form?
Well, it comes back to that word of mine that I say all the time, research. You cannot write paranormal without research. As much as you think you know, there's much more you don't know.
Yes, and it is okay. Take it from someone who did it. It is okay to buck the trend and do something brand new.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I will say that one of my favorite things as a writer is having reference books. I have
Yes.
a whole, it's called the Mythical Creatures Bible. So yeah, that tells you how much is in it. It says all the lore about all paranormal creatures. But I also have, even for naming my characters, I have a baby book, a baby naming book. Because
Babynames.com and
yeah,
old census data are my two favorite ways to get good names.
there is no point in stressing yourself out over picking a name, especially in a first draft, when you can just flip through a book and say, that's it.
And my character Frey, that is literally how he got his name. I need a name. We're just going to call you Frey, Frey, and it stuck. I had to write in a origin story for a name for the first time ever. And I'm like, what could Frey be short for? What could it be short for as a nickname so this makes sense? So, yeah, sometimes you just got to take a name and run with it and not stress. And it fits the character.
Yeah, and I've seen way too many times with my editing work that it's obvious people did not do the research that was needed. And then it's like you have to stop editing and you have to tell them, okay, as good of a plot as you have, you need to go back and research and add more before it can be edited properly. So,
and even just one of the things you might have to edit or research while editing for paranormal is if they're in animal form, they can't XYZ, can they? Question mark. I got that
right.
question from my editor before for my werewolves and my cat shifters. Can they XYZ when in their animal form? If not, you need to fix this. And I'm like,
Or if traditionally they can't, you got to figure out a way to explain why they can.
yes,
Because
yes,
like you said, you can break the boundaries of the supernatural, because there's no such thing as 100% correct, because nobody knows what's 100% correct, because nobody knows if it even exists. So you can break the boundaries.
Paranormal.
Yeah, you can break the boundaries, but you have to do it in a smart way.
I love how you worded that. I love it. Succinct, to the point, on point for sure, and an epic way for us to end on a high note. So I'm going to go ahead and give you solo mode for this, my dear. First of all, some shout outs to others in your community. Go ahead.
Oh, shout outs. Interesting. Well, obviously, there's my lovely co-host, Lynn Howard. She is not only an author, but she's also on authortube. And she does not censor herself whatsoever. So you're going to see some interesting things happen with her. Excuse me. Oh, I did mention Sarah Sutton. Another person on YouTube that I would 100% suggest everybody watch is Autumn Ashley. She has a video where she finished her first draft of her very first book ever, and it is so infectious. There's no way you cannot be inspired when you watch that video. I will give a little bit of a shout out to a podcast that I enjoy. It's called Partners in Crime. It's hosted by Adam Croft and Robert Dawes. They are in England, but they talk about all crime fiction, so it's really interesting. And then for anybody who is around my age and grew up in the 80s and 90s, Melissa Joan Hart, who starred in Sabrina the Teenage Witch, has a podcast as well, and I suggest that you binge every episode because it's the most fun I've ever had listening to a podcast in my life.
I am actually like waiting for her to finish a little more, so that way when I go on summer break, I can just binge it all.
Yeah.
Like the first 2 weeks of summer break. That's my goal.
They just finished season 1, so...
So yeah, there's plenty of backlog.
Yes. They ended with talking to her mom about Sabrina because her mom was her like agent kind of.
Yeah.
So I haven't listened to that one yet, but I'm looking forward to it.
I think that was popular for not a lot of 80s, 90s shows where the parents took on that role because she was young. Like the makeup made her look like a high schooler. I think she was still in middle school when she started that show, wasn't she?
One of the things you'll learn on the podcast, which I didn't know, is that she was actually older than she was supposed to be.
Really? I thought she was younger.
No, when she was in Sabrina, she was already in her 20s.
Mm-hmm. She looks good for her age even today. Yeah. Dang.
She was on a show before that on Nickelodeon called Clarissa Explains It All. And even in that, she was supposed to be like a preteen, and she was already like 16 years old.
That's the show that made me think she was much younger. Yeah. That's the show that confused me then, because you're right.
Honestly, that just means she's a good actress.
Means she has some good genes in her too. Good Lord.
Yeah.
Bless her for that. So we are going to go ahead and wind down appropriately, my friend. I'm going to go ahead and launch us again into solo mode for you. Tell us about everything you have upcoming, launches, events, where to find you next, and anything you want to just shout out there as far as your plethora of books you have.
Okay. Well, I don't have like any launches or anything scheduled because right now I'm just kind of trying to finish something. But definitely I will announce it on all of my social media, which is basically Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and probably on the podcast too, even though it's not a supernatural book. But hopefully I'm going to get something out the beginning of next year. Let's see. Definitely the next release will be the young adult romance. After that, probably going to be a young adult fantasy, but we'll see how that goes. Let's see. My YouTube is basically vlogs. I was doing a lot of like the talking head videos, but I decided to stop doing that and just do vlogs. And right now it's one video a month. But when the podcast is in the off season, it will be one video a week. Next coming up video is my experiment of writing like Ernest Hemingway. Let's see. Podcast Let's Get Mystical goes every Friday. There's a new episode. Other than that, this is where I can be found, in this lovely, weird aesthetic of a room. Doing my work, writing my books, watching Golden Girls or Doctor Who or Supernatural, and the list goes on.
You said magical words. Are you a Dorothy, a Rose, or a Sophia, or a Blanche?
I think I'm a little of everybody, but honestly, I think I am more Sophia than anybody.
See, I'm a Dorothy, but I want to be a Sophia.
Oh, I honestly think I have a little of everybody. I think Blanche would be the least that I have in me, but I definitely see some of me in each one of them. So
there is one episode, I will admit, where I am Blanche. The episode with the little balls of sunshine in a bag, where she's going through her own author existential crisis.
Yep.
And the
Yep.
egg yolks are in the... Yep. I think I have had one or two of those 3 a.m. insomnia-induced writing moments. Thank you much.
Yeah. Yep. And otherwise, I'm just living my days in this apartment with my cat, who is very demanding. And again, I'm very surprised he has not shown up once during this, because I was afraid he was going to be all over the camera.
He's not your cat, you're his human. It's the other way around. You are the servant, he is the owner, don't you know?
Yeah, well, I am called mommy, and my mom is called grandma, so...
I call myself the resident cat mom for a reason, so totally understood.
Yeah.
Well then, my friend, it has been a long hour. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you'll join us in the future for sure, especially since I'm planning other paranormal type things. And if there's anything we could do to help you with launches, don't hesitate to let me know. But to our lovelies in the audience, thank you so much for being here today. As always, take care of yourself a little bit better each and every day. We love yous. Bye.
Bye.